Wonderful. So hello, everyone, and welcome to the Science Symposium. I'm very excited to be here today on August 18th with our judges and speaker. I'm going to say your names, and please just jump in and correct me if I'm wrong on any of these pronunciations. So we have Dr. Otilia and Dr. Neda. Are those correct? You can give me a thumbs up if it's good.
Yeah, that's fine.
Perfect, thank you. And then we're also joined with Danika from the University of Victoria today. And I also want to make note, we have Noeen in the background, and she is the Science Symposium chair and brainchild of this event. So you'll be hearing her voice coming in as well. And I'll introduce myself and I'll say, hello, my name is Ashley, and I'm very excited to be here as the vice chair of the symposium and moderating today's event. So before we get started, I would like to give a quick land acknowledgement and take a moment to reflect on our connection to the land and thank the traditional guardians of the land, of which we here at SCWIST Vancouver live and work. So Vancouver is on the unceded ancestral and traditional lands of the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, the Stolo, the Sechelt, the Squamish, and the Indigenous people of Turtle Island. So we are in round 2 of the Science Symposium, and today we are in the physical science particle physics category, and we'll be having Danika present today. So before we get started, I'll just go over a few housekeeping rules. Please note that today's event is being recorded and it will go up on YouTube within 24 hours. We do ask that everyone keep their selves on mute while the presentations and the Q&A are going on. And please, for all of our listeners today, there will be a chance to have an audience Q&A. So if you have any questions that come up during the presentation, just drop those in the chat box and we will be asking them later in that Q&A session. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to thank the sponsors that have also helped make this event possible. So we have Northeastern University in Vancouver, and they have a 95 employment rate for biotechnology. So if you're interested in that, please check them out. We also have Admire Bioinnovations. So if you want to polish your skills in business or science, check out their programs. We're also very excited to have AbCellera on board. They discovered the antibody that neutralizes the viral variants of COVID-19 very famously, as well as Microsoft. So if you're interested in an internship in IT, check out their website today. And lastly but not least, we have 𝐒𝐃𝐄𝐑 Therapeutics, and they provided the lipid nanoparticle delivery system that is a key element in the development of Pfizer's vaccine. So very awesome organization there. Now today, we have our judges. So I will give you both a moment to introduce yourselves and give just a quick outline of who you are and what your background is. And then Danika, I'll jump over to you as well, so you can give yourself a quick introduction before jumping into your presentation. So with that being said, Dr. Otilia, I'll put you on the spot and I'll just ask for a quick hello from you.
Hello, everybody. So I'm a Romanian particle physicist, and currently I'm working at CERN and living in France. So hello from France. I'm involved in high energy collider physics, and I'm working in Atlas experiments since around 11 years. And there I studied the detector performance, aspects related to leptons, and as well I'm conducting searches for new physics, in particular supersymmetry or searches for non-standard Higgs bosons.
Well, thank you. And Dr. Neda, I will move over to you now.
Hey, so I'm a postdoc at Harvard. I joined in 2018. Currently remotely working from Mont Tremblant, so very up north from Montreal. I've been with the Atlas collaboration for a while. First started when I was doing my master's at UDM, and I then moved to Europe for my PhD. I got my PhD from Humboldt University, and my main research interest is in top physics related processes. And I'm very happy to be here and listen to the presentation today.
Wonderful. And I want to say thanks again to both of you for being here to be our judges today. And now, Danika, I will pass it over to you and stop sharing my screen so you can give a quick introduction of yourself and begin your presentation.
Okay. Hi, I'm Danika. I'm a third year, or I guess entering fourth year PhD student with the Atlas group at the University of Victoria. I work on a search for dark matter with data from the Atlas detector, and I'm also very involved in work on analysis preservation and reproducibility. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today.
Yeah, so please feel free to get started whenever you're ready.
Oh, okay, so I'll just share my screen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, can you see my slides okay?
It's perfect.
All right. Great. So yeah, as I mentioned, I'll be talking about reproducibility, so specifically reproducible data analysis workflows in experimental high energy physics. So just to start with a bit of motivation, why we should be worrying about analysis preservation to begin with. So maybe I'll just refer to a Nature article that was published in 2016, which found that over half of the 1,500 scientists polled from various different scientific disciplines have experienced an inability to reproduce their own results. And for computationally intensive results, like those that we produce in high energy physics, preserving the data is really only half the battle. You also need to be able to preserve the analysis of the data that is required to actually produce the result of the search for new physics or whatever it is you're trying to do with the data. So the idea of computational reproducibility is that given the same data, you should be able to perform the same computational analysis to produce the same results that were produced in the original analysis. So the goal is to make it completely trivial for another researcher to rerun your analysis chain and get the same results given the same data. So just to give sort of a high-level overview of what searches for new physics look like with the Atlas detector, so one of the major detectors at the Large Hadron Collider. So we start with high energy collisions in the Atlas detector in the Large Hadron Collider, about 40 million per second. These then go through the trigger system, which selects events that are potentially of interest for various physics studies. This raw Atlas data then gets reconstructed using central software, and then it gets skimmed and derived quantities get calculated, and that produces what we call the derivation data. And then data analysis teams will start with this derivation data and compare it with simulated data to search for new physics. And in the event that the analysis team does not see any evidence of new physics in the data, they can then set exclusion limits to exclude the phase space of the model for new physics that they were looking for. So all of the steps leading up to the production of derivation data that the analysis team works with is done by central processing code. But the part that is done by analysis teams, so the data analysis, can be facilitated by central tools and generally is, but the strategy and details are unique to each search. So just to go into a bit more detail on what goes into data analysis for a search for new physics, we start with a signal model, so a prediction for a hypothesis for new physics that predicts a signature in the LHC collisions. We can then simulate events that would be produced in the LHC according to this model for new physics and pass the simulated data through the same reconstruction chain that we pass the actual atlas data through to produce derivation level signal data. We can then do the same thing for the standard model background. So by that I mean modeling events that we would expect in the collisions from known physics, and again simulate them, pass them to the reconstruction chain, and get the derivation level background data. And then of course we do the same thing with the data itself. And then with these three forms of derivation data, we can pass these through skimming and various cuts to define analysis regions of interest for the search for this particular signal model. We can then evaluate uncertainties in both the measured and the simulated data. And then we can pass all of this through a statistical analysis, which essentially answers the question, is there any evidence for new physics when we compare the data with the simulated standard model backgrounds and the simulated signal model. So the part where the analysis team skims the data, defines the analysis regions, evaluates uncertainties, and performs a statistical analysis is generally done non-centrally and is therefore not really automatically preserved. So in general, the team will write custom code for these steps, and it will generally be built on top of central version controlled frameworks. So a lot of code goes into designing a search for new physics with data from these high-energy physics detectors. And the preservation of this code is a critical first step towards preserving the analysis. Fortunately, modern version control tools like GitHub and GitLab make this step relatively painless. However, the code may rely on some very specific dependencies, and in general, the operating environment where you run your code will probably not persist forever. So the key components that need to be preserved in order to fully preserve a search for new physics or any sort of data analysis is, first of all, the code needs to be fully preserved. The environment in which the code is run needs to be fully preserved. And then the actual workflow, so the steps that the data are passed through to produce the final result of the study needs to be fully preserved. So first I'll talk about how we go about preserving the environment. So first of all, what goes into the analysis environment? So there's the operating system for the machine that the code is run on. There's any system libraries or installed packages that the code may depend on, and any central frameworks that the code may be built on top of. So Docker is an industry standard tool used to create and execute workflows in what are called containers. Docker is used increasingly in industry and in HEP to preserve and reproduce very specific operating environments. So the idea of Docker is to fully package a Linux computing environment into a Docker image and then execute this Docker image as an isolated container on any host that's running Docker. So there's a central public registry called Docker Hub, where any user can upload images to or download images from. It contains a lot of generic base images like Linux CentOS 7 or an image with Python 3 pre-installed. And then in addition to that, the Atlas collaboration also maintains images for most of its central analysis frameworks. So to preserve your environment, you can choose a base image, add your unique workflow dependencies on top of it, so any installed packages, etc. And then you then have your fully encapsulated analysis environment. So the next thing that we need to preserve is the workflow. So how the data actually gets processed with the code in the preserved environment to produce the final result. in principle, well-written documentation should allow others to reproducibly rerun an analysis, but as I'm sure many of us have experienced, the style and quality of documentation can vary pretty widely. So as an alternative, why don't we just automate the workflow so that the user, any user can run it themselves with some trivial startup commands. So there are workflow specification languages that have been developed to facilitate this. So CWL, originating in the life sciences, and also 𝐒𝐏𝐃𝐄𝐑 has been developed in high energy physics. In addition to this, there's a platform that has been developed in recent years called REANA. So this is a pilot project originating in high energy physics, and it's a platform designed to execute workflows within Docker containers. So it supports multiple different workflow description languages, as well as multiple different types of computing backends. So REANA embraces the declarative approach to workflow specification, meaning that the user specifies what they want the workflow to do, and but they don't have to worry about the details of how it's actually done. So they don't have to worry about how the resources get allocated or where the data gets stored. The user just needs to express the analysis workflow as a series of dependent steps and specify how the output from one step gets input to subsequent steps. The 𝐒𝐏𝐃𝐄𝐑 workflow spec language is also very good at facilitating the high level of parallelizability inherent in many HEP workflows. So it uses a scatter-gather paradigm where the input data set gets split into many parallel processes to sort of process chunks of the input data. And then in several steps, the parallel processes get merged together until finally there's a final step in the end that that sort of combines everything together and produces the output of the workflow. So just to give an example of a sort of real life workflow that has been run on REANA, this is a workflow that that I designed. So it's designed to preserve a search or an analysis called the MET+jets search, which searches for new physics using jets in the Atlas detector recoiling against missing transverse momentum, where the missing transverse momentum is sort of indicative of particles produced but not detected. So the idea of the preserved MET+jets workflow is that you can start with a simulated signal data representing events in the detector that would be produced by a new model for new physics. The workflow then applies various selections to select the data of interest for the search. It then bins the data into several analysis regions, and then it combines this signal data with the Atlas collision data and the simulated standard model background data, performs a statistical fit to produce a CLS value, which quantifies the confidence with which the signal hypothesis is excluded by the search. So just to show sort of the chain of how this workflow gets run on REANA, each of these green oval boxes is one containerized step in the workflow, and you can see that there's sort of three processes running in parallel, which ultimately get merged and combined into a final interpretation stage to produce the CLS result of the CLS value, which is the result of the search. So the total runtime for one signal model was 10 hours, which I don't know, I think it's kind of cool that you can sort of perform a search for a new model for new physics in 10 hours. Yeah, that's just an example of something that's been run on REANA. So to summarize, each search for new physics at the LHC relies on multiple stages of custom code written on top of ever-changing frameworks, and ensuring the computational reproducibility of these searches is a real challenge. Fortunately, we have modern version control and containerization tools to facilitate the preservation of the code and operating environments that we run the code in. And there's a powerful new tool called REANA, which facilitates the design and execution of reproducible analysis preservation workflows. So REANA was designed originally for HEP, but in my opinion, I think it could be applicable to the wider scientific community. So yeah, thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Danika. We will now take some time to turn it over to our judges for our judges Q&A session. And just a quick reminder for everyone in our audience, if you do have any questions for Danika, please drop those in the chat box and we'll ask those during the audience Q&A afterwards. Thank you. So I'll pass it over to you, judges.
Right. Yes, thanks a lot for this nice presentation. Yeah, I have a few quick questions. So maybe start with the last, near the end, where you said that it's 10 hours or 9.5. Was there some, wondering if there was some optimization to get to this number of hours to run the, or can we do a bit better?
So I guess the only optimization that was really done was the fact that we parallelized into the different the three epochs that we simulate data in. So MT16, A, D, and E. I can imagine that. Well, it's hard to. I can't immediately see a further parallelization that could be done. But if we were to run over various different signal models, or sort of the same signal model with different parameters, we could also parallelize over those different input models and try to combine them all together, and for example get like a contour plot or something at the end.
Mm-hmm. Right, because you probably know, but the plans for the collaboration is to move from these different Monte Carlo campaigns that we have now here, which you show MT16, A, D, and E in this graph. Mm-hmm. So if we were to have one Monte Carlo campaign for the run-2 data analysis, do you think this would be faster, slower? Would we be able to do a bit more if we were provided with one large sample instead of these different campaigns?
I guess, yeah, it's. I guess you would almost have to design your analysis with that parallelization in mind to some extent, I think, but I don't immediately see any reason why you couldn't sort of further subdivide within campaigns or within one campaign, if we move to that.
Okay. Yeah. Do you actually? I don't know if you happen to know. Is CMS doing something similar to what's happening in Atlas in terms of the code preservation? This is just a curiosity.
Yeah. So from what I understand, Atlas is further ahead in terms of like preserving workflow, like these searches for new physics, in such a way that they can be trivially rerun on new signal models. but CMS has embraced analysis preservation in the form of like preserving calibration workflows and so on. But I don't think they've had the same push to make this sort of analysis, the preservation of searches, like approval requirements and so on.
Okay, and so obviously this is a workflow beyond just a personal design. Of course, it's the collaboration, but could you maybe mention more? What's your specific role if you have worked in the preservation code, or were you just a user case from your dark matter searches?
Yeah, so really the main developer of the sort of preservation framework itself is someone named Lucas Heinrich. And he also was very involved in sort of making this sort of preservation an approval requirement. So my role in analysis preservation in the Atlas collaboration has been as the analysis preservation contact. So I help analyses design their workflows to preserve their searches for new physics and sort of make sure that all of these workflows are maintained in central areas and are more or less ready to be run by future analysts. So I have not been involved so much in the in developing the code for it, but rather in sort of aiding analysts in using the framework.
Okay, great, thanks. I'm done from my side.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for this super nice presentation. It was quite clear. And on top of what Neda already asked, I also have a few questions. A very simple one. For example, on slide number 3, you say that when you explain the main goal of your search, of your activity. And my question is, from your point of view, why this goal? Why you think this is the most important goal to drive you to perform or to work on such a topic?
I guess I don't think it's the most important part, but it is a crucial part. So certainly data preservation is critical. I mean, like you can't, yeah, you can't reproduce the analysis without having the data itself preserved. But I think that the analysis preservation is something that is somewhat underappreciated, but just as important for making the results of our searches reproducible. And I think it's important. I would say it's important in any scientific discipline that has non-trivial analyses of data, but high energy physics, I would say, is a particularly strong use case for it because the analyses that we do with the collision data are extremely non-trivial, and I would, in my experience, pretty much impossible to reproduce if you didn't just finish designing the analysis. So, yeah, I think it's reproducibility in general is a critical part of doing science, and analysis preservation is a critical part of that.
Okay, then thinking about this analysis preservation, how can one use it, for example, with run-free data in an analysis which relies heavily on data-driven estimations for the background? You know, defining dedicated control regions to be able to measure certain parameters, or simply to use data to estimate the background?
So I don't see that actually being a problem, because that only really gets done once, right? So like you develop your code to perform that data-driven estimation, but you don't have you don't have to do that again if you want to reinterpret the search with a new signal model, at least as far as I understand. So I guess from my perspective, yeah, I don't immediately see any unsurmountable issues there.
Actually, I was thinking from a framework which was preserved in run 2 to be used in run 3. In that case, I mentioned.
Ah, I see.
With a completely different team, no?
Yeah. I mean, I guess in that case, it would, yeah, like if you're wanting to take a new approach, like a different approach to estimating your background, then yes, like the analysis team will have to rework the code a bit. So yeah, I can imagine I can imagine that you wouldn't be able to use the preserved analysis as is if you wanted to use this different approach to estimating the background. But that's sort of a problem for the new analysis team, I guess.
Yeah. Thank you. So on page 13, 14, when you mentioned the Docker, and from what I understood from the paper, I didn't read it very, very carefully. I would say that REANA is really using the Docker images, creating containers, and so on. So please, could you explain to the audience what you mean by Docker containers, Docker images, you know, at a level to someone which never heard about Docker and images and containers?
Sure. So the idea of Docker and, well, really containerization in general is quite similar in principle to a virtual machine. So you want to be able to sort of package your operating system and any installed dependencies into this image that you can then bring up on any machine that is, in this case, running Docker. The only difference between a Docker container and a virtual machine is that the Docker container is much more lightweight because it's only packaging what's absolutely needed to run a program on this in this isolated environment.
Okay, thank you. I was also wondering, what's the gain or the main motivation to use REANA instead of just running directly recast workflow on the local machine, or even on GitLab, etc. Thinking that, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So initially, when I started as the analysis preservation contact about 1.5 years ago, now that is what people were doing. They were either developing and running their recast workflows on their personal computer where they had Docker downloaded, or they would run them, as you say, in like continuous integration pipelines on GitLab. And the issue that people were running into was that their personal computer might not have enough memory or CPU to actually run a full the full workflow. So they would just run into issues with limited computing resources. And then the issue with the continuous integration, running them as continuous integration pipelines, was that the runners that CERN uses are not really designed to be running like high memory computationally intensive workflows. So like they're really more just for testing the code. So yeah, again, it just wasn't something that the GitLab runners could sort of do at large scale. So I guess what REANA provides is dedicated central resources that people can use to run their workflow in an environment that has already been set up for that particular purpose, and has sort of a very enthusiastic team of developers that can address any issues that come up as people design their workflows and run them on the platform.
Thank you. How many users are now currently with REANA?
It's hard to get an estimate, because it's actually being used by various different LHC experiments at this point. But I guess from my perspective, I've seen it being increasingly embraced by people developing Atlas analysis preservation workflows. So I don't know, I would say I've seen order of a dozen Atlas users working with it, both for preserving workflows to search for new physics, and also for like calibration workflows and so on. But yeah, I admittedly do not have a good number for the total number of users.
Do you know if also the theory community is starting to use it or not? You had interaction with them?
Sorry, with which community?
Theory community. For example, a theorist wanting to use a recast from Atlas for a particular analysis to try their favorite model and put limits. Why not?
Yeah, I personally have not heard from many theorists yet, but I certainly hope that will start to, since yeah, that they would be obvious users of these preserved workflows.
Okay, thank you. And on slide 14, since we were discussing about the gain of using REANA, you have something like that as collaboration also maintains images for most of its central analysis frameworks. So I was wondering what you really mean by this.
So we have images for every release of analysis base and ath analysis. And there's also images for analysis top and Athena. So basically every version that gets released and becomes available via CVMFS is also uploaded as an image to Docker Hub.
Okay, awesome. I have only one question left. So on slide number 22. So if I understood right, you have the recast from the MET+jets analysis, right? And you use the recast implementation with REANA to obtain the results. So I was actually wondering, slide 22. I have another 22 on my side, is 21, I think.
This one?
Yeah. So for this one, what exactly was your programming here? What exactly you did to move from the recast to REANA?
Good question. So there were a few steps that were needed for that. Most of them were like fairly trivial, I would say. So like we needed to make some changes to how to sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Permissions changes within the Docker images so that the Kubernetes cluster that REANA runs on could actually access everything in the images. We also had to make some changes to where the intermediate data gets stored. So for recast, we would store the intermediate data within the container. But for REANA, it would quickly run out of memory if we were trying to do that. So instead we had to store the intermediate data in such a way that it would actually get stored in the built-in Kubernetes storage. I mean, other than that, it was just some very minor changes to the workflow spec files. But we are working to make those the steps needed to make that transition as minimal as possible. And we have actually made quite a bit of progress to that end in recent months.
Awesome. And actually, this will be after widely used and proposed in Atlas collaboration?
It's already being actively used.
Okay. Okay. And one last question, since we don't have questions from the audience yet on chat. I was wondering how old is actually REANA, and if you contributed also to creating this platform.
So REANA, so I first became aware of REANA in early 2020, and that was when it was sort of being introduced to the Atlas collaboration as this new tool that that people could make use of to design and execute their analysis workflows. I admittedly don't know when sort of the initial concept was born, but in my experience, it's come into sort of active use in the last sort of 2 years.
Okay, thank you very much. And have you participated in improving the platform, or only in using it and adapting the frameworks from the recast flow from Atlas to it?
I would say my main participation has been in making it more accessible. So more accessible to being used to run the Atlas recast workflows. I'm not a REANA developer. Yeah, I would say my role is in facilitating the use of REANA by Atlas analysts.
Okay, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, judges, for your questions. Danika, a question for you from me is, you mentioned at the end of your project that there are applications in this project to the wider scientific community. Could you discuss a little bit more about what that might look like, what any roadblocks you would encounter would be, and just, yeah, generally just a little bit about what that expansion could look like?
Sure. So at this point, that expansion is, as far as I know, still somewhat hypothetical. Mm-hmm. But I guess I don't see anything special about high energy physics workflows that makes this platform or this approach in general to preserving data analyses sort of only applicable to high energy physics. So basically, it's just giving a platform to preserve your computing environment. As far as I know, most scientific sort of CPU intensive scientific work is done on some sort of grid. And typically the operating system on the grid is Linux. So I guess I don't see a good reason why Docker could not be used to preserve those environments. And beyond that, it's simply a matter of the user specifying each stage of their workflow in these preserved environments. And there's just nothing special about high energy physics workflows that makes it that makes this approach that would make this approach that would not make this approach applicable to other scientific studies, as far as I can tell.
Thank you. I'll give a quick second to our audience just to let them know. If they do have any questions, now's the time to drop them in the chat. Otherwise, I would like to thank our judges so much for your contributions today, and as well, Danika, thank you so much for joining us today. Noeen, I'll quickly dump you in the spotlight and see if you have any last remarks you'd like to say before we pass it along.
No, I'm good. I don't have any questions. So it was a good presentation, Danika. So.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me. It's it's such a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. So as well, our judges, I would love to hear any closing remarks that you may have before I will jump into our closing slides then.
Yeah, great talk. Thanks, and good luck with the rest of your PhD.
Thank you.
Yes, really good job. And I remember also you work in the SCWSIT group in Atlas, so I know you a little bit more than the rest of the audience. And I really want to say great job and congratulations. And of course, good luck with the selection process.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful. So I'm just going to jump in and share my screen again. Perfect. So we do have a few more Science Symposium events coming up. And if you would like to find out where you can register for those, you can always head over to the SCWIST Eventbrite, and you'll see all of our upcoming events listed there. Otherwise, you can also go to squist.ca/events, and you'll find our Science Symposium events there. Our next one in the particle physics category is coming up on August 25th. So please, if you're interested, register for that. Also, if you're looking for any updates or information about the Science Symposium, you can always check out our Science Symposium catalog that is on our website. So please check that out, or contact myself or Noeen if you have any questions about anything that's going on. And lastly, I would just like to once again thank our judges so much for the time you have spent with us here today. We really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for attending. And of course, thank you, Danika, for your presentation and answering our questions. It's just been wonderful and fascinating for me as someone who's not in this field to hear all about the work that is going on. Yeah, thank you so much. And I hope that everyone enjoys the rest of their day or evening wherever you are.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day, great evening, and take care. Thanks, Danika. Thanks for coming, and have a great time. Keep in touch, okay?
Bye.
Thank you,
Thanks.
everyone.
Bye.
Have a nice day.
Oh, I will exit as well.
This is Neda.
Oh, did she leave?
Yes.
I'm writing her on Skype.
Yeah.
Is Adrian?
Yeah, Adrian is still here.
I will just remove them. And
Oh, I need to stop recording.
yeah, I'm